So Lynn asked me to talk more on that's from the technology side of things, and I'm going to open by actually saying that as having been an early adopter from a technology perspective for many years, I'm now actually I'm a real troglodyte when it comes to the role that technology plays in many areas of life, and energy's sort of no different to that. I think sort of the word of caution I would always sound with new technology is just that technology in and of itself tends to only implement or systematise processes and outcomes that we're looking to achieve. And so when we're thinking about how we actually, shape tariffs and how we engage with consumers on tariffs, technology potentially is one way that we can use to engage with customers, but it's not the solution to how we actually fix the tariff problem. So from that perspective, I think it's interesting to actually understand sort of what's coming from a technology perspective. So at the moment, and this changes month on month, at the moment we have just under 2 million houses with PV on the roof, and over the next 20 years that will triple to about 6 million homes. These are numbers from the ISP, from AEMO. At the moment we have about 50,000 residential batteries in Australia, and that'll grow to about 1.2 million over the next 20 years. So as we get towards sort of 2039, 2040, we're talking about 20%, the current forecasts are for 20% of homes to have batteries. We obviously also hear a lot of talk around controllable loads, and there's going to be a lot of them. Precisely what they are and how they're going to roll out is still sort of a really interesting and open question. It's interesting when customers think about home automation, they tend to think about automating things like their lights, because you can clap your hands and your lights will come on. But from an energy system perspective, that's actually not very interesting to us, because there's very little demand in the lights and much more demand in things like HVAC and hot water, which actually have a much bigger impact on consumers' lives in terms of their comfort factors. And then the elephant in the room is obviously EVs as well. So we talk a lot about the devices that consumers are putting into their homes, but all of them are on the same scale of the average daily consumption, which is probably somewhere in the order of sort of 25 to 30 kilowatt hours a day for many people, less obviously for apartments. When you think about putting EVs into the home, you're talking about batteries of the order of 60 to 100 kilowatt hours. So actually between 3 to 4 times more than the average consumption in the home, and so that has the potential to dramatically shift how we manage the grid, and from that perspective also how our tariff structures have to be arranged in order to take advantage or to deal with the challenge, however you see it. So as you start to go through the list of technologies that we're getting in people's homes, you start to realise that there are going to be some homes that have nothing. There are going to be some homes that have solar, which is a passive DER, and there's going to be homes that have batteries, and controllable load and controllable EVs, and that's an active DER. So when we start to think about tariff reform or the next set of tariffs, we actually have to think about the fact that not only are customers different and customer segments are very different, but actually technologies are very different, and the ability for consumers to respond to different tariffs actually depends on the devices they have in their home. And so on the one hand, it's actually laudable to think about us setting prices just at the connection point, but once you start to think about the diversity of devices behind the connection point, it does raise really interesting questions about how we actually deal with that to make sure that it's fair and equitable for everybody. I think the other thing, as we sort of start to think about technology, is that the interface that most users actually have to the electricity system as a whole is the light switch. And it's a really excellent interface. You turn the light switch on, the lights come on. If you turn the light switch on and nothing happens, then you've either blown a globe or your electricity system's out. It's quite a nice way of engaging with the system. When we think about new technologies, smartphones and new devices and things like that, my suspicion is that customers get sick of it very quickly. I've had monitoring on my home for a long period of time, and I have to be honest, I very rarely look at it, actually, because I walk in the door and I turn the light on, and at the end of the month I pay the bill, and that's really the engagement I like to have with the system. Even though I love working as part of the energy system and I love building technology for the energy system, that's still the interface I have with the electricity system as a consumer. So, sort of just in thinking about where we're going, I think we have to think about technology at the same time as ensuring we have energy and social equity. These are hugely important. Not everyone is going to own a device. In fact, the most vulnerable customers are the people who will not own the devices and will not have the time to engage via technology with our electricity system, and they have to be protected at all costs. They have to be able to turn the light switch on and know that they're getting a fair go at the end of the day. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to think about other representation models. So when we think about DER in the very broader sense, we're always thinking about what people can own behind the meter. I actually tend to think of the group of customers who don't have access to those kind of technologies as being opportunity poor customers. And they're not always people who are poor. They're in many cases people who don't own their home or live in apartments. And actually, if we think of them as just people who are poor, we actually fail, I think, to recognise the really important opportunity to actually engage a much broader base in the deployment and the operation of DER. The other thing that's also happening at the moment is we're moving into a situation where actually for a single household could have multiple organisations representing the participation of their assets in the market. So, for example, you could have somebody who's managing your frequency control ancillary service participation if you have a battery behind the meter, and at the same time you could actually have a retailer who's representing your energy consumption. Now, when we think about tariff design, we have to think about how we're going to reconcile this, because otherwise we're going to end up in a situation where we are going to have multiple organisations competing to manage similar assets for participation in multiple different markets. And there's I'm sure, some extraordinarily perverse incentives that are going to come up there. So I think the opportunity is to think about how we broadly structure tariff reform to take advantage of technology where we have it, to find new ways to get technology to people who can't install it in their homes, so through community scale storage and generation assets, and ultimately to do it in a way that ensures that everybody gets a fair go at the end of the day.